Welcome everyone to AURI Connects Webinar Wednesday, part of AURI Connects monthly online series, featuring updates on the work that AURI is doing to foster long-term economic benefit for Minnesota through value-added agricultural products. I'm Dan Scogan, the AURI Director of Government and Industry Relations, and your host on Webinar Wednesdays. The AURI Connects program is hosted by the Agricultural Utilization Research Institute in Minnesota. This program aims to actively engage all participants in the food and ag industry to improve competitiveness of producers, businesses, and entrepreneurs through ongoing, purposeful connection of resources and partners along the value chain, and increased knowledge of opportunities, technologies, and trends. Remember, this event is being recorded and archived and can be found at auri.org. Remember also that you will be muted during our presentations today, but you can send us your written questions through the Q&A portal on your screen. Also today, we will be asking you to participate on a Padlet and on 2 Zoom polls. The link to the Padlet will be sent to you through the chat portal. There, we welcome your thoughts and your comments on potential actions for supporting resiliency in the supply chain. The polls and their results will appear on the screen, and we ask that you provide your feedback as they occur. Today, we welcome a collaboration of participants in a recently completed survey and a report on the impacts of COVID-19 on Minnesota's food and agriculture supply chain. Participants today represent AURI, the Minnesota Department of Agriculture, Minnesota Agri-Growth, Green Seam, Hormel Foods, and the Minnesota Grocers Association. Today, we'll start by looking at the survey and its results. To present the COVID survey report, we welcome Dr. Linda Thompson. Dr. Thompson is the Director of Organizational Advancement at AURI. Organizational development strategies are human resources systems, continuous professional development for promoting board members and employee professional practices, and preserving AURI's culture and values. Linda is affiliated with the Transformative Learning Center, the Neuro Leadership Institute, Board Source, and MRA Management Association. Linda served in leadership positions over the past 30 years. Dr. Thompson, welcome to Webinar Wednesday.
Thank you, Dan, very much. Well, COVID-19 has affected nearly every person in every system across the world. The same is true for Minnesota's food and ag manufacturers and processors. AURI and its service partners are pleased to present a snapshot of this important area of the food and ag ecosystem. In this presentation, I'll share a few details of the July survey, including the demographic information that describes the businesses and the primary themes from the open-ended questions. Then our expert panel will dive deeper into the themes. As supply chains became compromised in May and June, the ag service partners wondered what supportive actions and/or services were needed to potentially help improve supply chain resiliency. An anonymous survey was designed with demographic and open-ended questions. The survey was then sent in July to Minnesota's food and ag manufacturers. We received 114 usable surveys. 42% of the businesses were in operation less than 10 years. About 50% operated from 10 to 99 years, and 6% 100 or more years. In terms of revenue, about 51% reported annual net revenue of less than $1 million, and about 49% represented businesses in the $1 million to over $1 billion range. We asked businesses for their zip codes to consider distribution. About 35% were from the metro, and about 63% were in outstate. We also asked what sector they represented. Nearly 45% said they had a specialty sector. Those specialty sectors included food areas such as spices, dry goods, organic mixes, prepackaged and frozen foods, along with co-packers, beverage manufacturers, those who produced processed fresh cut produce, milling, and food and safety diagnostics. Close to 15% had specialty manufacturing in the fruit and vegetable area, and roughly 10% said they were either in animal slaughtering or animal food manufacturing. When we asked about how their business had been impacted, about 45% of the respondents' revenue either increased or remained steady, and about 55% experienced revenue losses, which led to challenges including cash flow. And sadly, several respondents reported losing their businesses. Respondents said unemployment benefits were disproportionate to wages, and employee absenteeism was reported as high. These businesses also navigated around a fearful public and temporary shutdowns. For some, managing interstate commerce was challenging, given the consuming task of learning varying state criteria. In terms of labor, roughly half of the businesses had fewer than 10 employees. The other half of businesses had 10 to 100 employees. As compared to pre-COVID employment levels, 2/3 of businesses said their employment levels remained the same. We asked what disrupted the supply chains? And topping the disruption list was sales and marketing at close to 45%, which aligns with the 55% of businesses reporting revenue decreases. About a third reported labor disruptions, which parallels the reported high absenteeism. And roughly 28% noted disruptions due to the procurement of inputs. We asked the businesses to list examples of inputs that were not available. Those included limited and overpriced PPE and cleaning supplies, limited food ingredients such as fresh produce, bottlenecks in acquiring beef and pork proteins, and hardware, given the difficulties with overseas shipping. So in the next section, we'll talk about the major themes and the resiliency needs. Many businesses believed it was important to adopt a crisis management mindset and a response plan that included daily clear communications, cross-functional meetings, pivoting quickly, using creativity to reconceptualize product lines, and using substitutions and finding temporary labor. To address employee concerns, businesses collaborated daily and with local health officials on the latest COVID information and communicated that to employees. In innovative operational practices, leaders located alternative supply sources and broadened their base of suppliers. Some supply orders were placed months in advance, which helped with adequate staffing. Several suppliers were prepaid to ensure adequate supply. Other businesses temporarily brought operations in-house and/or produced selected supplies to alleviate the long lead times. Collaborations became crucial to filling supply gaps. Businesses indicated that the times called for a willingness to collaborate in new and unique ways with supply chain vendors and customers. Many collaborated locally to piece together local economic vitality for one another while maintaining their unique brands. Here are some examples of how they did that. 5 cheesemakers collaborated to produce a Minnesota cheese victory box. In another case, local ingredients were collected to produce baked goods and sold through the local bakery to support the community's economic vitality. And some communities offered building space. Another form of collaboration was paying invoices more frequently to ensure cash flow to suppliers to keep them afloat. And businesses kept in close contact with their financial network for guidance. In terms of resiliency needs, the prevailing situation and shortages in the supply chain caused a ripple effect. These fell into 2 buckets, the macro level and the business level. At the macro level, overwhelmingly, businesses noted the importance of a sense of public safety. Financial help was welcome, but more is needed, especially in terms of forgivable loans, along with the seed and innovation funds. Businesses indicated the importance of healthy and available employees as an important part of stabilizing the supply chain. Ample supplies of PPE and cleaning supplies, along with assistance in retrofitting buildings to keep people safe, were reported as necessary. With online ordering and virtual work being accelerated, broadband was expressed as a significant need. Likewise, several policy and regulation adjustments were requested. Examples included lower taxes, support to broaden sector-based innovations and expansion, fast-track licensing, and adjustments to balance interstate competitiveness. At the business level, proven management practices were described as invaluable during a crisis and were needed to strengthen collaborations and partnerships. Businesses are looking for new supply chain connections, are striving to help employees stay healthy, which was believed to be an important factor in stabilizing businesses and subsequently the supply chain. Many businesses reported that their markets collapsed and new markets are needed, and other businesses requested help with e-commerce. The long-term issue of too few meat locker plants in outstate was magnified, and help was requested in getting these in place. So if you haven't so far, it is your turn. We're interested in your experiences. So in this pop-up poll here, simply select all the key resiliency items as explained on the slide, just explained, that might be affecting you. And while you do that, I will summarize the key takeaways. The COVID crisis hindered food and supply chain and egg supply chains, but while they were disrupted, they did not break. The crisis revealed gaps that could lead to supportive assistance, which included a sense of public safety, along with more grants, loans, and capital, new connections, and new markets, additional locker plants, and regulatory and policy adjustments. Companies used collaborative and innovative strategies to stabilize their businesses. Capital, labor, and a robust technological infrastructure were reported factors in accomplishing supply chain resiliency and thus economic stability. Supply chain connections, activities, and outcomes need to be detailed and scenarios analyzed. Minnesota needs more small and medium-sized locker plants in rural areas, while other needs included policy and regulation adjustments, government assistance programs, and greater awareness of those programs. The stage is set for Minnesota food and ag businesses to proactively build more resilient supply chains. Indeed, crisis is a messenger and practice for the next crisis. It was a pleasure presenting a snapshot of this important area of the agricultural landscape. Now I'll turn it back over to you, Dan.
Well, thank you, Linda, for giving us a brief overview of that survey, and we will have a panel discussion coming up shortly that's going to maybe take a little bit deeper dive. If possible, can we see the results of that first poll that was taken then? And if not, oh, you can see sense of public safety leading the way by quite a large amount, and maybe hand in hand with that, the labor pool, and then of course funding. And we heard a lot about broadband during that survey as well. Excellent. Thanks for participating. You'll have an opportunity to take another poll with us as we get to the end of our panel discussion as well. But when you survey impacts on food and agriculture supply chain, it's important to include the Minnesota Department of Agriculture. Representing the department today is Paul Hugonin. Paul has been promoting locally grown and raised products for 30 years as part of the Minnesota Department of Agriculture. He started at MDA as a student worker and worked his way up to his current position as director of the Ag Marketing and Development Division. Paul spent much of his career with the Minnesota Grown Program, a statewide effort to promote locally grown products ranging from produce to Christmas trees. The Ag Marketing and Development Division handles a variety of programs, including roughly $8 million of federal CARES Act funding that came through the Minnesota Department of Agriculture. Paul's going to share with the department's perspective on the survey, its results, and its call to action. Paul, welcome to the program.
Thank you so much, Dan, and thanks, Dr. Thompson, for the great summary of the report. The Department of Ag, we're very grateful just to be a part of this project. The information and the feedback is going to help us, right now in the short term, but it'll also maybe more importantly, help us in the long term Our goal is to be able to use this information to tailor our programs to where the need is greatest and to help us do our part to create a more resilient food system. For starters, the report illustrated the value of collaborations and partnerships. And I think this project and the survey is a good example of multi-sector collaboration. It involves state government and nonprofits and private businesses and literally every kind of organization in between. And I think that's really important. The Department of Agriculture has a dual role in Minnesota agriculture. We're first and foremost a regulatory agency with responsibility for ensuring the safety of the food supply. And that SNAP poll kind of illustrated the value of that, where, customers need to feel safe. And that's about being safe about the confidence in the food supply and being safe about where they're going to purchase their food. But we're also responsible for providing resources to farmers and processors to help them increase their markets. Dr. Thompson noted several resiliency responses and needs, and they included things like flexible quick pivots, coordinating with government entities related to things like resources and funding, e-commerce, and certainly the need for more meat processing. And that's maybe one of the biggest things that this whole crisis has illustrated is the importance of trying to expand the meat processing sector here in Minnesota. I know while government doesn't generally have a reputation for flexible, quick pivots, there are a couple of examples of how we've tried to adapt our resources and services to help folks make their own responses and quick pivots to COVID and to access funding. Meat processing was obviously a huge sector, and one of the things we did was a rapid response grant for meat processors, to be able to give them a quick infusion of cash to purchase equipment or to rent additional cold storage space so that on a short term, we could increase capacity. That program alone had over 80 awards and over $360,000 that got put on the street to meat processors really quickly. At the same time, our regulatory folks in dairy and meat inspection were working hard to increase processing capacity by working with processors who could potentially move up a level of inspection. For example, going from custom exempt processing to equal to processing so that it could have a net increase in slaughter capacity in the state. E-commerce is a theme all over the report, and we created a rapid response cost share for e-commerce to help Minnesota food companies shift to online platforms, things like Range Me, or to help folks improve their websites so that they could do more e-commerce. And those things, we've already gotten reports from companies who've seen big increases in sales because they were able to jump into some of those online platforms. And our inspectors had to change how they do business. They had to increase communication with regulated companies and businesses, do more advanced plannings to help ensure the safety of employees on both ends of the equation. And so, for us, we're really interested in these results, and we're interested in listening and taking the time to try to incorporate what's in this report and what folks said in helping us improve our services. And again, I just want to thank URI for spearheading the project. Thanks to everybody who took the time to respond to this. We're glad to be a part of it. Thanks, Dan.
Thanks, Paul. Appreciate those comments. And I just want to remind those who are online with us today that we are looking for your additional comments and thoughts on potential actions for supporting resiliency within the supply chain on our Padlet. The Padlet link has been sent to you through the chat box, so you can look for it there and you can make your comments there as well. Let's continue the conversation, though, with our panel discussion. Moderating for us today is Tamara Nelson, Executive Director of the Minnesota Agri-Growth Council. Prior to joining Agri-Growth, she served as Senior Director of Commodities and Affiliate Management for the Illinois Farm Bureau. Before joining the IFB, Nelson was a Senior Consultant in Agri-Food Marketing in Washington, D.C., and an Assistant Executive Director of International Policy Council on Agriculture, Food, and Trade. I want to remind you that as the panel discussion comes to an end, we'll be asking you to participate in another poll, which will appear on your screen. Tamara Nelson, welcome to Webinar Wednesday, and please introduce us to your panel today.
Thank you so much, Dan, and thank you everyone for having me here. AgriGrowth is always thrilled to be a part of collaborative efforts, especially those in which we can include our own members as panelists and also new friends like Wes. And I'd like to start first by introducing our three panelists. And I think you will find their backgrounds very interesting. I'll try to keep the introduction short, but if when they answer their first question, they'd like to add a little bit more, perhaps a testament to how their past or their professional development particularly qualified them to respond during this pandemic, that would be awesome. I am a native Minnesotan, by the way. I do have to say that. I didn't want everyone to think I was from Illinois, not that it's a bad place, except perhaps if you're a basketball fan last night. So first, let's start with Wes. Wes is a longtime agricultural producer of grain and pork in Minnesota. He serves on the board of governors for Green Seam. And if you're not familiar with Green Seam organizes and aligns the collective work of stakeholders to promote investment in ag business, and it contributes to the shared vision in building an existing ag business prominence across southern Minnesota. We're delighted to have Wes here. He is also on the board of the Minnesota Corn Growers Association. And our panelists after Wes is Richard Carlson. He's Vice President of Quality Management at Hormel Foods. You know Hormel, it's a Fortune 500 food company, and he is responsible there for overseeing company quality, plant regulatory, and food safety activities. And as you may or may not know, that's for their entire global operations, which span 75 countries worldwide. Although I'm quite sure he was very focused on Minnesota this year, it is interesting that he had to worry about facilities in other countries. And our final panelist is Jamie Poole, President of the Minnesota Grocers Association. The Minnesota Grocers Association, I think, and I hope you're familiar with, they did a fantastic job, as did their members during this entire pandemic, in keeping shelves stocked and everything that in between that it took to get everything done so we could all be at home. They are the only state trade association representing the common interests of everyone engaged in all of the aspects of the agri-food industry. So welcome, Wes, Richard, and Jamie. We look forward to asking you a little bit more deeper questions about the various COVID related challenges and opportunities that we had. I'd like to start, and just for the benefit of the audience, we're going to kind of break our discussion into some themes, and they were the themes also identified by Linda in her presentation. And I'm going to ask each panelist, we're going to go Wes and then Richard and then Jamie. In the first theme, in terms of what happened, whether it was marketing or sales impact, whether it affected the labor that you use or you rely on, whether it affected your own or your business's safety, or how did it affect the inputs into your businesses? So in that first theme area, I'd like to ask each of them, starting with Wes, to just take about 2 minutes and kind of dive in a little bit to what happened in terms of either marketing and sale, labor, employee safety, or your own safety and your input markets. Wes? Can we unmute you?
Let's try that. Hey, good afternoon. Thanks for having me, and hopefully my time with you is valuable. I'm a lifetime farmer, ag producer here in South Central Minnesota, and come from a very traditional farming background. I've been very fortunate in things in my life and some experiences, and I also feel that I am part of a bigger food supply system and energy supply system rather than just a commodities producer. For today's conversation, I'd like to, in this question, I'd like to deal with 3 portions of my segment. One being a purchaser of inputs in the supply chain, bringing in things such as seed, crop protection products, parts. And you got to remember, we're dealing with Mother Nature, so our schedule is pretty much Mother Nature's. We've seen some slowdown in those things as the COVID thing hit this spring. Like most businesses, we were concerned about availability of labor and delivery of those products. We made a conscious effort to have possession of things we were going to need ahead of time and have them in our own facilities, so that if one of our suppliers did all of a sudden with a significant employee shortage, we would still have what we needed to move on. So that was sort of our way of dealing with that. And in the end, we had a very bountiful crop here. The second step I would take is the sales of our commodity products. You know, Richard with Hormel and the whole hog supply chain disruption. That's a huge thing. And just so everybody is on here knows, is the supply chain for hogs and slaughter runs at about somewhere between 98.9 and 101.1% of capacity on a daily basis. There is just no elasticity to that system. Compounded with some of the tariff wars we've been dealing with this last year. So, you know, we're all driving less. You know, that's part of it. The labor shortages in the processors, such as the Hormels of the world. And we really had very little control over that other than kind of battle our way through it and try to be creative like everybody else. The third role I'd like to highlight is I'm also a consumer. And I've got to say is our system has worked marvelously this year. I've said for years, have you ever seen a foot of shelving in a grocery store that's empty? And the answer to that has been no. And this year, for the first time in the middle of COVID, was the first time there was empty shelves in grocery stores. And while that shelf, there might have been a bare spot, there were still products available and nobody was put in danger or had significant injury or loss because there was not products available for their to sustain themselves. Thank you.
Thank you, Wes. And Richard.
Thanks, Tamara. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here today. And as far as the first theme, what I really wanted to focus on was the idea of safety. And within Hormel, we have a series of cultural beliefs, but the first of those is a cultural belief called safety first. And what that means for us is that employee safety, food safety, and safe animal handling practices are paramount to what we do every day. And the COVID pandemic really provided us the opportunity to demonstrably live that cultural belief of safety first. When we think about our 20,000 team members across the world and, you know, being able to put COVID protection and mitigation strategies in place so that they could come to work and feel like it was a safe place to be, and that we could prevent COVID from spreading in our workplaces, and at the same time, hopefully have our employees become ambassadors for those messages and take those behaviors back home to the communities and the families in which they live. As Wes pointed out, we saw a lot of chaos in the supply chain in the early part of COVID, from in terms of marketing and sales, just the impact of managing a global supply chain and having shortages or seeing facilities that, you know, did shut down because of COVID related things, and how those ripple effects end up working their way through the supply chain, and how we as a food processor have to react to those ripples in order to continue managing our business.
Thank you, Richard. And I know we'll look forward to hearing some of your key takeaways for longer term planning as well in the future. Our final panelist, and I know someone who's already received many of our thanks, Jamie Poole. Jamie?
Thank you, Tara. I think in this first category, one of the things that we found, I think, so interesting is the layers of people that depend on our industry, farm to fork, right? In our association, we have manufacturing, distributing, wholesalers, brokers, and obviously grocers. Minnesota's blessed with large and small grocers all across the state. And the role that they play in that community became so prevalent, right? How the daycare providers depend on us for food. And when there was some gaps in the shelves, the panic that that caused. So I think one of the things we had a heightened awareness of is the responsibility to communicate to that consumer. As they're hearing and seeing media reports of things happening on farms and the fear that there's something wrong with the food, is there something, are we not going to have enough? How we could try to do everything in our power to raise the comfort and control as much as possible that panic within the consumer. We saw the hoarding, right? We saw the panic buying, and trying to make sure that we created a calmness in that frontline experience, right? And answering those needs. And I think that was something we take for granted, kind of to Wes's point, that we've always had the shelves stocked. Everything is always there, and everything that we expect is right there for us. And we had to modify that and how to manage that. The second point that I would also say that was so critically important, we're all regulated industries, as Paul shared, and certainly ag regulates our stores. We clean. Safety and food safety is number one and critically important. We had to bring also that front and center for the consumers to see more of that, shifting some of our labor to spending more time wiping down shelves in a public way. It's not that they weren't done before. Everyone's carts were clean. Consumers wanted to see that, right? And then doing immediate response, not waiting for instructions to social distance or responding to what was happening around us in a concise and thoughtful way. I think having to show that leadership, which everyone did in the state through the food chain, was so important to our neighbors, which we are too. So
Thank you. That's terrific. And several of you have already kind of moved into, with some of your comments, theme two, which is kind of what was the resilient response from the industry. I guess I would throw it open first to Wes, but I'm interested in knowing if there were any new collaborations that you had that you haven't mentioned, different style of management or planning. I know Wes mentioned building some redundancy into his input supplies. And then perhaps what new resources did you find that helped you build your own resiliency? Wes?
Oh, well, good question. I'm going to put a little bit different twist on this. And what I want to talk to is the how important and how valuable the essential workers are and the people that do go to work every day. That's where a lot of the credit for getting through this whole thing needs to be. And I sometimes feel we have mixed messages in the marketplace right now, with part of it being stay home, stay safe, don't go out. In the meanwhile, we also have employees that have to go to work every day, that we got to have products available. So that to me is, let's give all those people a pat on the back and say thank you to them moving forward.
Thank you, Wes. Richard, your thoughts on kind of your Hormel's resiliency response or others that you saw in the agri-food community?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll just echo Wes's comments. In the last 10 months, we've used the word heroes a lot. And there are people that have shown up every day and have been heroes, from our healthcare professionals to package delivery, UPS drivers, right? The people that work in our plants. And for us, that's really where we have applied that word hero. Our production professionals who have shown up every day and have continued to help us produce products to feed people all over the world. And so it cannot go without stating, it would be, I mean, it just can't be said enough, just how much we appreciate everything that they've done over these last 10 months. And, you know, in terms of collaboration, I think a big learning for me was that because we are a regulated industry, but our regulation comes primarily at the federal level, as we entered into the COVID pandemic, the need to really collaborate and build bridges, particularly with our state and local public health departments. That was an area that we just hadn't done an adequate job of building bridges. And so as we needed to get in and start talking with county public health in some of the communities where we operate, where we may be the largest employer, right, and start proactively sharing the things that we're doing to keep COVID out of our business. That really was the biggest learning around collaboration. From a management response standpoint, Dr. Thompson mentioned in the survey review this idea of more communication. And from the beginning, we opted to be transparent in all of our communication, which meant we went above and beyond anything that maybe we ever thought we would do. But even to the point of for every COVID positive individual in one of our manufacturing facilities, we talked to every employee about that. And we shared the messages about how you can keep yourself safe and about mask wearing and sanitizing and social distancing. And we just continued to reinforce those messages and communicate through videos and some cartoon series that we developed and just lots of different ways. But it was also about how we kept our management group aligned and meeting with our plant managers, our quality managers, our human resources managers multiple times in a week, and using those meetings to drive changes to policy or practice. It was also part of how we use some collaboration tools, some technology, software, in order to build out standard operating procedures and to make sure that our monitoring for all of our COVID preventative activities was being done, and hold that all in a central repository that everybody all over the company could access and put to use. And so we did find from software to good old-fashioned one-on-one communication, lots of ways to collaborate and manage through the pandemic up to this point.
Awesome. Thank you, Richard. And Jamie, you have a lot of members, a lot of different members. How did you and your team see resiliency built either in your association or in some of your members?
Yeah, I think one of the things that we immediately were able to, and to Richard's point, relationships became so important, right? And things that you've been working decades to build, being able to draw on those to come up with solutions and way to evolve. As some of our partners in farm lost those contracts with schools, with restaurants, we worked in conjunction with the Department of Ag to try to see if any of that food could get repurposed into the grocery store, and we had some great success stories. It was positive to see partnerships evolve with possibly a restaurant that's known in a community for maybe a bread product or something, and then all of a sudden see the grocer be able to get that on the shelf. So having the capacity to be able to evolve with regulation, not that they're not all important, but to have flexibility as a crisis is hitting and have that transparency. To Richard's point, one of the things that the association did on behalf of industry is making sure that we were hitting media points, getting communication out to consumers, again, to try to build that confidence in what was happening in the supply chain and to not panic. So I think those were some areas. Another unique partnership is that we worked with daycare providers because the shelves were empty and some of the products that they needed. This is not an area that we would normally think about, stepping up into, but it helped keep the workforce, all the essential workers working because the daycare needed the supply. So kind of the depth and the interest of how our business evolved. When you think about as an industry, either you know or you don't. I mean, obviously, you know that we start 6 months to a year out planning for, we're buying Christmas candy in July. So also to think about how we had to shift that purchasing power as fast as we could to meet those needs. And some of the things that happened nationwide and how statewide, how that, we saw toilet paper coming from restaurant supply houses to try to fill the shelves. So I was so proud and impressed at how fluid we could be when sometimes we take a little time to move. And of course, I would mirror the heroes. One of the things I always talk about as our industry is that we're taken for granted a little bit because we go to the store and the food is there. And the people that stock the shelves and ring you out and bag your groceries, you also take them for granted because they're just there and part of your daily routine that maybe you don't even like to do that much, right? And so this elevated that workforce to a whole new level, and the appreciation that we heard back from people really actually thanking and embracing those folks that were showing up and understanding what it costs to show up every day for those families. And that's, I think, and that probably leads us almost into area 4, Tamara. I'm sorry, a little early, but that's something that people aren't going to forget. And that's a positive for all of us in supply chain.
Well, great observations, Jamie. And so I'll kind of, I'll morph the last 2 themes a little bit. Let's do theme 3 as kind of a lightning round. So this is kind of your takeaways that might affect your long-term planning. Wes, what was the most difficult decision you faced? And maybe what's the bright spot you've taken away from the COVID challenges?
Well, the biggest hands-on thing for us is obviously lack of demand for our products, the hog disruption cycle. We lived through part of that. But what I want to talk about is what Richard touched on earlier, and that is we as businesses are going to have to accept the role of educating our employees and the other customers about health concerns and about the virus. In some ways, I would say that our government has failed to really create a good understanding amongst the citizens of how this virus works. And I'm thinking public service type of announcements, and boiling the message down to something that simply that people can understand, such as, what's coming out now is finally being said. We need to get to 70% herd immunity. That's the goal. And if we're going to have to get there one way or another, whether that's staying at home or with the vaccine. But I'm not hearing that clear, simple message in the marketplace that people understand that. And what people don't understand, they fear. So we need to educate and get people comfortable that they can go to work and they can do some of these things. And for low risk people, we need you going out every day and doing what needs to be done, going to work. The high-risk people, the senior citizens, we need you to stay home and be safe and take care of yourself. So that's an additional role, whether we want it or not. And while I'm kind of poking my finger at people, I'm also going to poke at the media by saying, I don't know that they've been asking the right questions in order to accomplish that first goal. They talk about how many new cases or how many deaths we had, but we don't ever hear anything about, with the antibodies test, what percentage of the population currently is immune or has had it. And that's part of that, creating an expectation of what people are going to run into and how we're going to come out of this. So that's my long lightning round answer. Thank you.
Thank you, Wes. Richard, how about you? What was the most difficult decision you faced, and maybe what's the one big bright spot from the challenges?
Well, this single question is the one that I've probably pondered the most in getting ready for today. Because when we think about employee safety, there really aren't difficult decisions. There are just the right decisions. And so that's how I feel like we've approached this entire scenario. But when I reflected on what were the difficult decisions, early in the pandemic, we did have 5 different manufacturing facilities that we, at one time or another, decided to idle, take a temporary production pause. And that was for a mixture of reasons. And, some of those were because of employee anxiety. When there were the first few COVID positive cases, people became concerned. They weren't sure if they should come to work. And so, clearly there was a need for us to step up and do something different in order to reach them, to calm their anxiety and help them feel better about being at work. And so I feel like we did that. And I think in and amongst that, probably the most difficult decision actually had to do with a small production facility that we have in the state of Kansas. And there are a little over 100 people that work in that facility. And we made the decision to idle that facility on the basis of one employee who was COVID positive in a van pool of 11 employees who rode to work every day. And we knew enough at that point, and this was really kind of early April, to know that there was a pretty good likelihood that more of those employees from that carpool would indeed become positive. And so without waiting, we made the decision to idle that business and send everybody home, keep them safe. If, you know, that person was ill, let them recover, right? And that probably was the single moment where you said, okay, this was not a hard decision, but it was a decision that we maybe never expected to have to make. In terms of bright spots, I would say, you know, we talk a lot about technology making the world smaller. And so I definitely think that we've been able to see that over the last 10 months as a company, you know, through the leadership of Jim Snee, and hats off to Wendy Watkins and her communications team here at Hormel. Just the fact that we've been able to put on midday connect sessions to keep people informed and connected, that we've been able to have a number of concerts for our team members of hope and thanks, and the fact that we've been able to partner with the Mayo Clinic and have their doctors on to talk about the pandemic, and to Wes's point, do a good job of educating. Our most recent town hall with Mayo doctors was last week, and the focus was really on the vaccine and about the process of developing the vaccine, and the efficacy of the vaccine, and starting to build some positive momentum around this idea of it's good to get the vaccine. We want you to do it. We need you to do it. It's part of how we all get back to something that is our new norm.
Thank you, Richard. And Jamie, I know you've already done a great job of telling us some of the things that you all face, but most difficult decision, biggest bright spot, or what might there be long-term changes in supermarket operations that you'd like to share?
Well, I think the most difficult mirrors a little bit what Richard was talking about, and not certainly that it's the safety of our workforce and our customers there's not a difficult decision there, but early on, the biggest complexity was obviously the unknown and how to manage those. When those cases did start happening, and a lot of our folks in small towns, there's so much knowledge of what's going on in the town and how to manage when people do need to come in and get food and nourishment. You do need to stay open, and you have a responsibility to the community to be there. How to manage that as this external is going on. As things became clear and we started creating, putting up plexiglass barriers, doing that external cleaning, doing the social distancing. We got into, obviously mask mandate as we started rolling out, things became more clear. But obviously the lack of knowledge and information for everyone in the beginning was very scary. And there's such an responsibility that we feel to our workforce and community. Navigating and managing that was a heavy burden for everyone. And it was I would say the most difficult. Certainly it's unfortunate that maybe we're out of toilet paper for a while and that became the social media joke, but the fact of the matter is, those are real people's lives and families. And that was a lofty burden for our leadership in this industry. I talked about how we're seen as heroes, but I think the other thing that's very, very positive and that will be wonderful as we come through this is our lessons learned, because crises happen, right? We have hurricanes, we have weather, we have all kinds of crises that happen, and we're excellent as a nation joining in to solve that particular crisis in a certain state, in a certain community. But this was nationwide, and how we reacted and how we got there was phenomenal, but it also showed us that we need to focus on that locality, and we need to have multiple ways to move our food chain, multiple ways to be able to be fluid, so we don't have the burdens on poultry, on hogs, on that. How do we make that better? And I know we don't have answers today, but I think the conversations are going to change as we move forward, and that's incredibly a bright spot for everyone, because consumers win in the end, right? So.
Absolutely. And I know one of the questions that had come up in the chat or the Q&A was regarding the comment you made about how some products from folks, maybe bakeries or other, that they already were producing, maybe were able to be put in stores. Is there, you mentioned the importance of relationships. Is there any kind of ongoing effort with most of the retailers to kind of contact local producers or production associations to get products if they need them?
You know, I've always had a great relationship with Minnesota Grown. And one of the things I would also say is as technology advances, one of the things that makes brick and mortar unique is some of those local relationships. So we had those, they expanded, and I think they will continue. I know we're working with AG to ensure that they do, because that is, I think, very, very important as we move into the next cycle, is that local. So it's ongoing, of course.
Excellent. Wes, I noticed you unmuted. Did you want to add anything?
No, not at this point.
Okay, so I'm going to move to some of the questions that we had. I guess generally for each of you, do you think that the disruption that COVID caused is going to force positive improvements in the food system? I mean, we've talked about how we were already pretty resilient, but do you see any positives? And I think some of you have already said so, but Wes, I'll turn to you first.
Well, our food system has continually improved forever. So this isn't going to be any different. I think, yeah, that there will always be improvements. I guess the questions I see moving forward here is on a short-term basis is how long will the immunity last, whether it's from the contracting the virus or from the vaccine that's administered. And is that going to be 6 months or a year or more? And how long will it take for the virus to mutate? So that's a question that we will find that answer out over time. Let's hope it's a long time, and let's hope the vaccine is very, very effective. A longer term effect that I'm wondering about society and the workforce in general is people staying at home, and people are timid about going out. How quickly will people get back into the routines of going to special events, ball games, concerts? I worry about students and who have been put on the shelf since last spring, and will their academics and their things, how much confidence and how much ambition and how much motivation are they going to have going forward? And will this time out that they've experienced in their life affect them? Because we need a society full of people with a can-do attitude, ready to go out and live their life and be part of relationships and communities. So that's a longer term effect, and I hope it's a positive one, but it's going to be a hurdle to get everybody up and going again.
Absolutely, and thank you for that, Wes. And I know I think I'll turn it also back to Richard. Richard, positive improvements that you see coming out of COVID for the food system.
Yeah, so I think, I talked about early in the pandemic in the spring, there was a fair amount of chaos in the supply chain, and we certainly don't see that now. As we saw an uptick in cases nationwide, we really didn't see an impact in the supply chain. And I think the supply chain broadly is going to be much more better prepared to handle things like this. I think, the point was made in locality. There are things, and I think the survey pointed out locker plants, right? Outstate slaughtering in smaller communities, right, is an area that has to be focused on because we did see that as an issue or a gap in the spring. But I think the thing that we're developing here is a little bit like muscle memory, right? We have been fortunate in our working careers to never have experienced a significant disruption. We might have dealt with a blizzard, or there might have been, some other unfavorable market conditions, but to experience something this significant, we've never had to deal with that. And while a lot of businesses would have had pandemic influenza plans, those were written a number of years ago, to the point where when we pulled those out back in January, February of this year, really outdated because of technology and really not that useful. And so we're developing some muscle memory that we can use to face additional crises, whatever those are going to be, once we clear the COVID pandemic. And hopefully we don't see another pandemic like this for a really long time, but I'm confident that if there is something else on the heels of this one, that we're going to be a lot better prepared to address it.
I love that muscle memory anecdote, and I think it kind of goes back to maybe, you know, people who've dealt with something, whether it was World War I or World War II or immigrating to the United States. You do learn from those things, and I really applaud those of us in the food and ag industry. Wes, your very humanistic comments about people and moving forward, and I think we are all going to learn many positive things out of the pandemic. Jamie, your thoughts, just, you know, maybe from the retail perspective, anything new, different, exciting that you've seen happen or expect to?
Well, one of the things I think that is going to happen, you know, we've got a lot of longevity in our industry. We have decades. We have, you know, families that are 5th, 6th, 7th generation in the stores. I think this built a new level of confidence in our resiliency, in our ability to navigate and manage. I think, you know, this is the routine. This is how we do things. We order, we do it this way. And I think it's changed the way everyone sees themselves and the role that they play in getting food to the community. So I think that will be a long-standing effect internally for our industry.
Awesome. And a quick question, I guess, someone made reference to AI, maybe H1N1 influenza. Was that what you were referring to, Richard or Wes? Or are we talking generally about the flu, response to flu?
Yeah, well, my comment was really around the fact that, you know, if you go back 15, 18 years, we had concerns about H1N1 and becoming pandemic influenza. And so that was really when a lot of our first crisis plans around infectious disease pandemics were written. And again, because we didn't experience that, it was something that we tucked away and we really didn't think about. And now we've really had to live that out. And none of us are certainly ever going to forget what we had to do in the year 2020.
We have just about a minute yet, but I would love to give you each a question, a yes or no answer, and if you need to put a few caveats in. But we had heard early on about shortages of PPE and for employees and others, and also testing. Yes or no if that's improved or just improved or still need help? Wes?
I think it's improved. Stuff is available at this point in time from my standpoint.
Yes, improved.
Absolutely improved.
Excellent. Well, Dan, I think if everyone could please heartily in your mind or with your own clapping at home, please thank our panelists. I'm going to turn the program back over to Dan Scogan. Dan?
Tamara, thanks so much. And thank you panelists for a great conversation surrounding this important issue. A couple of first of all, you should see the other Zoom poll up on your screen and you could answer that. We'll take a look at those results here in just seconds. They're starting to come up now. The Padlet that offers an opportunity to give us comments or insight on how the COVID-19 has affected you or how you think we should be better prepared for the next pandemic is going to remain open for 7 days. So if you didn't get to it today and still want to leave a comment or a thought, save that link and go to it and get that comment in the next 7 days. As you can see, the poll is up and number one, playing a larger role in talent development with high schools, colleges, and universities. I saw a news article today that there's going to be a lot more jobs in agriculture than there are students coming out of colleges to fill them over the next 5 years. So we need to get into our high schools and colleges and talk to those students and those potential future wage earners about the opportunities that are there. Trying to see real quick, number two was put more effort toward filling innovation gaps by assisting food and ag startups. And then the third highest in this particular poll was educating the industry on e-commerce and market channel opportunities. So appreciate everybody who took the time to fill those polls out and to go to the Padlet and leave your comments today. With that, that concludes AURI Connects Webinar Wednesday for today. We want to thank you for all the presenters and to all the participants who took the time to join us, comment, and participate. AURI Connects Webinar Wednesday is presented by the Agricultural Utilization Research Institute of Minnesota. AURI's mission is to foster long-term economic benefit for Minnesota through value-added agricultural products and processes. We are interested in your feedback, so please respond when we send you our event evaluation. Remember, for more information on today's program or any of the work AURI is involved with, you can go to auri.org. Now, we plan to take a break next month, but that does not mean we'll not be contacting you. The University of Minnesota has announced that they will be participating in a multi-region, multi-institution research and outreach program to assess the impacts of COVID-19 on food and agricultural systems and developing strategies for coping with future pandemics, natural disasters, and human-made crises. In January, everyone who registered for today's webinar will receive a link from AURI that will allow you to take their survey. And we ask that you please fill that survey out in a timely manner so the university can continue their important work. And again, thank you for being with us today.